Look at this loser. Yeah, what's wrong? Cat got your tongue? Pathetic, just like your ride.
Why don't you leave him alone and get lost?
The afternoon heat pressed flat against the windows of Rosie's Lone Star Diner, a place where the smell of griddle grease and sweet tea usually meant something simple and good. But on this particular day, the warmth inside couldn't reach the cold that two boys carried through the door. At a corner booth sat a boy alone, a grilled cheese sandwich cooling in front of him and a paper napkin covered in pencil sketches of motorcycle engines beneath his hand. His name was Ethan Delgado, and though his eyes held the quiet focus of a boy lost in his own private world, the leg brace resting against the booth told a story the room had already decided it knew. The two boys who walked in didn't just notice him. Before we dive into this incredible story, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I love seeing how far this channel reaches. And if you enjoy powerful emotional stories with real-life lessons, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Ethan Delgado had been 12 years old for 3 months, and in that time the world had not gotten any kinder. The leg brace had been part of him since he was 7. Cold metal and worn straps that announced him before he could speak. Muscular dystrophy, the doctors said, as though a word that long could explain what it felt like to watch other boys run. At school, the stares came first, then the whispers, then the chair pulled away just before he sat down while someone nearby swallowed a laugh. He had learned to check before he sat. He had learned a lot of things nobody should have to learn at 12. At home, his mother Marisol worked doubles at the pharmacy and came back smelling like hand sanitizer and exhaustion. She loved him with everything she had, which was considerable, even when it wasn't enough. But alone, Ethan had a different life. Notebooks filled with engine sketches. Motorcycle magazines worn soft at the corners. A dream of building something with his own hands. Something no one could mock, mimic, or take. Colton saw Ethan the moment he walked in. That much was clear from the way his eyes found the booth, found the brace, and found his audience, all in the same slow, satisfied sweep. He said something to Wyatt, who was already raising his phone. Then Colton started walking. Not toward Ethan. Past him along the aisle, dragging one leg in an exaggerated limp, arms swinging loose, head lolling. The performance lasted maybe 10 seconds. It felt much longer. Wyatt's shoulders shook with laughter behind the camera. Ethan stared at his sandwich. Then the hand came, open-palmed, fast, connecting hard with the side of his head. The milk glass tipped and spread white across the table and onto his lap. The diner went silent in the way that only happens when everyone has chosen at once to pretend they didn't see. Ethan's hands found the table's edge. He tried to push himself upright. His arms shook with the effort. Colton leaned down close. "What's wrong?" he said quietly. "Legs don't work right." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Forks rested still against plates. Patsy Lou stood behind the counter with one hand gripping the edge of it, knuckles pale. She had run this diner for 31 years. She had seen arguments, accidents, a man propose on one knee in the back booth. She had never once not known what to do. She stood very still and did nothing. 2 seats over, a man in a gray work shirt cleared his throat, glanced up and looked back at his phone. A woman near the window shook her head, a small private disapproval she kept entirely to herself. A couple by the door studied their pie like it contained something worth reading. Not one person spoke. Not one chair scraped back. Colton filled the silence easily, comfortably, the way people do when silence has told them they're allowed to. And Ethan sat in the middle of all of it. Milk drying cold against his jeans, hands flat on the table, eyes fixed on the wall ahead. He had learned not to cry in public. He had learned that too. The room was full. He was completely alone. In the corner booth, nobody had noticed them yet. Roy Iron Maddox had been watching since the moment Colton walked through the door. 50 years old, broad across the shoulders, with a face that had been weathered into something beyond expression. He didn't shift in his seat. He didn't lean forward. He simply watched, with the particular stillness of a man who has learned that the world reveals itself if you give it enough time. Beside him, Daniel Salazar Ridge, to everyone who knew him, had gone very quiet in a different way. His coffee sat untouched. His eyes were fixed on Ethan with an intensity that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with something older, deeper, that lived behind his face like a permanent weather system. Neither man had spoken since Colton threw the first shadow. Then Roy set his cup down. Not hard. Just down. Final. The small sound of it carried something that words would have cheapened. Ridge was already standing. The leather of their jackets creaked once as they moved, and something in the room changed before anyone understood why. They didn't rush. That was the thing. Boot heels on tile. Steady, unhurried, certain. The sound moved through the diner the way thunder moves before the storm arrives, felt before it's fully heard. Roy walked half a step ahead, Ridge at his shoulder, and neither of them looked at anything except the booth where Colton stood. The woman near the window noticed first. Her spine straightened without her seeming to decide it. The man in the gray work shirt looked up from his phone and did not look back down. Patsy Lou's hand released the counter's edge slowly, fingers uncurling one at a time. Colton felt it before he saw it. Some animal instinct, late and insufficient, that made him glance back over his shoulder. What he found there was not rage. It was something harder to argue with than rage. Ethan looked up too. His eyes moved from Colton's face to the two men crossing the floor toward him, and something shifted in his expression. Not yet hope, not quite, but the first loosening of a breath he had been holding since the door opened. Roy stopped beside the booth and looked at Colton the way a man looks at something small that has made a great deal of unnecessary noise. Pick on someone your own size. He said it quietly, evenly, the way you state a fact about the weather. Colton's first response was a laugh, short, reflexive, the last thing his bravado could produce before it ran out of fuel. He looked at Wyatt. Wyatt did not look back. Then Ridge stepped forward, closing the remaining distance with one unhurried step, and the laugh died completely. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move his hands. He just looked at Colton with those dark, weathered eyes and said, "You ever bury a kid, son?" It wasn't a threat. Threats have edges you can grab onto, argue with, laugh off. This was something else entirely. A question carrying the full weight of a grief Colton couldn't see and couldn't measure and had absolutely no idea what to do with. The confidence didn't leave his face all at once. It drained. Slowly. Visibly. In front of everyone who had been watching their plates. Then Ridge did something no one expected. He turned away from Colton entirely. Not dramatically. Not as a statement. He simply stopped seeing him, the way you stop seeing something that no longer matters, and turned toward Ethan. He crouched down beside the booth, bringing himself level, and with both hands gently helped Ethan sit upright against the seat back, straightening him with the particular care of someone who had done this before, for someone else, a long time ago. Then he looked at him. Directly, fully, the way almost no one had looked at Ethan all day. "My boy had a brace like that," he said softly. "Strongest kid I ever knew." The diner broke open quietly. Patsy Lou turned away from the counter and faced the kitchen, her hand coming up to her face. In the back booth, an older man reached across the table and found his wife's hand without looking. Nobody spoke, but the silence had changed completely. It was no longer the silence of people choosing not to see. It was the silence of people who finally had. Roy waited until Ridge stood back up. Then he looked at Colton and said nothing, just looked with a patience that was somehow worse than anger, and tilted his head almost imperceptibly toward Ethan. Colton understood. There was no way not to. He turned to face Ethan. His jaw worked for a moment, finding and losing words, before something barely audible came out. An apology stripped of everything that had made him feel large 20 minutes ago. No audience in it. No performance. Just a 17-year-old boy who had finally felt the actual weight of what he'd done. Across the booth, Wyatt had already put his phone away. The video was gone. He hadn't needed to be asked. Roy stepped to the counter and laid several bills down in front of Patsy Lou without counting them. "Bring him whatever he wants," he said. "Whole menu if he likes." Patsy Lou looked at the bills, then at Ethan, then back at Roy. 70 years old and sharp-tongued to her core, she didn't bother composing herself. "About time," she said, and turned toward the kitchen. The diner exhaled. Outside, the Texas afternoon lay flat and wide and indifferent to everything that had just happened inside. Roy and Ridge brought Ethan through the door and lifted him onto the Harley with the matter-of-fact care of men who didn't make a production of things. They guided his hands to the handlebars, both of them wrapped around the grips, and Roy said simply, "Rev it." Ethan pressed down. The engine cracked open and roared, and the sound rolled out across the parking lot and down the highway like something that had been waiting a long time to be released. It was enormous. It was extraordinary. It was the loudest thing Ethan Delgado had ever made. The side door of the diner opened and Marisol stepped out, braced for wreckage. She stopped. Her son was sitting on a Harley-Davidson with both hands on the bars and something on his face she hadn't seen in longer than she could honestly remember. Roy pressed a small metal coin into Ethan's palm and closed his fingers around it. "You've got more strength than he ever will." Ethan looked down at it and said nothing. He didn't have words yet. But that night he opened his notebook and drew a boy on a motorcycle, rolling toward a horizon with nothing behind him but road.
And that's it for today's video. If you enjoyed it or learned something new, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps support the channel. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. Drop your thoughts or questions in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.